Good morning. I'm Lisa Abbott, the Executive Vice President of Economic and Community Development for Regional Opportunities Initiative, and I'd like to welcome you to the Housing Missing Middle breakout session. I'd like to encourage you to ask questions, and I'd like please put them in the chat, and we will ask them of our panelists at the end of the presentation. I would also like to recommend that you use the speaker view for the best viewing experience. We've been holding webinar sessions based on the Indiana Uplands Regional Housing Study for the past month, and we would like to encourage you to register to attend our upcoming sessions. Recording of our past sessions can be found on our website. We are really excited to have our speakers here with us this morning. First up, we will have Amy Haase. She is the Principal and Project Manager with Community and Regional Planning Group at RDG Planning and Design. For over her 20-year career, she has led a wide range of projects providing comprehensive planning, housing, market studies, and neighborhood and downtown revitalization studies for communities across the Great Plains states. Throughout her career, Amy has been involved in dozens of housing studies from small rural communities to multi-county regions, including the Indiana Uplands. She presented on various topics, including the decline of housing availability for the middle class and the importance of housing options for senior living. Amy is passionate about building better communities, and this not only shows in the communities she works in, but also those she lives in. Residing in Omaha, Nebraska, Amy has been a leader in neighborhood associations, and she serves on the Metro Transit Authority Board. Amy's work is driven by a passion to work collaboratively to create a place of meaning for all residents. A trusted leader in her field, Amy has been a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners since 2004, and she became a certified public facilitator in 2011. We also have Gerald Reimer of Urban Village Development. He is a graduate of the Thunderbird, the Garvin School of International Management, where he earned his MBA. He has worked for companies in domestic and international assignments that had revenues ranging from 40 million to 16 billion annually, including Honda, R&D, EDS, Deloitte and Touch, Omni Worldwide, and NDS. In addition, Gerald has managed, renovated, and built apartments in West Omaha over the past 15 years while serving in the various above-mentioned corporate positions. He has now devoted 100% of his time to pursuing his real estate development ambitions. Okay, I'd like to again remind you to put your questions in the chat, and we will ask them of our panelists at the end of the presentation. And I'd like to welcome Amy to share her screen and get started. I also would like to encourage you to use the speaker view because that will give you the best view of the presentation. Amy, take it away.
Great, thanks Lisa. And it's, I guess, great to be back in Southern Indiana virtually. I always know, I'm sure there would be some familiar faces in the audience, so sorry I can't see all of you in person, but I'm finding people are really actually enjoying this format. So, but it's, when you're the presenter, you kind of miss actually seeing all the faces in person. So great to be here, and great to see many of you all again as you're popping up on the screen. I want to talk a little bit about, first of all, what is missing middle housing and kind of define that a little bit, why it's needed in our communities, and then why we haven't been seeing it built, especially in the Uplands region, and why it's kind of needed within the Uplands region. So to start with a little bit, missing middle housing was a phrase that was coined by, actually, you guys have a Nebraska theme going on in this session, by Daniel Perolik. So Daniel is an urban designer, architect. He's actually based in Berkeley, California, but he was actually originally from Nebraska too. So sorry, you're getting so many Nebraska influences here. But it really, what it's describing is a series of multi-unit or clustered housing that's compatible in scale to single-family homes. And I think that's really, that and the walkability nature of the product style are two really important things, that they really have a sense of fitting into any kind of single family housing neighborhood. and this is where we really want to emphasize that it is more about design than it is about density. So that these units have a house sort of scale. So the picture here on the right is actually a side-by-side. I don't know if it's, this is the way it's termed, but I've coined this the shotgun duplex because that's what it reminded me of. It kind of reminded me of the old shotgun houses but somebody just made it into a duplex. Basically simple construction, usually wood frames, a construction, but density is what makes these actually pretty efficient. So we get a home sort of scale, but the density allows them to be pretty efficient and allows us to get some to more affordable ranges. So as I noted here, you will see this kind of shotgun style house, excuse me, and it is adjacent to a single family home. So this is a great example of where the lot size didn't change at all. Obviously, your lot coverage is changing a little bit, but we've been able to put 2 units that fit the scale and the comfort level of these homes. Now, this is in an older neighborhood, actually in a community in Oklahoma, and I believe this had alley parking then too. They're also duplexes, so I kind of showed that shotgun style. Here's more of a mansion style in my own hometown, so they can be side by side or stacked. I was realizing going through my photos, for whatever reason, I don't have any really great stacked ones. We don't see stacked probably quite as frequently here in the Midwest, but a little bit more. But this one here, which I would kind of describe as almost like a mansion style duplex, is in a neighborhood that it fits completely with the scale of the homes in that neighborhood. So it's one of those where you kind of look twice and you realize, oh wait, there's actually 2 doors on that house. That's actually a duplex, but it really fits in with the rest of the neighborhood. There's also townhome options here. So you can see in both of these, this is 3 units attached on the left, and I think the one on the right is actually only about 4 units attached. So again, fitting in and blending with the surrounding neighborhood. Smaller scale multifamily, often with their own entrances to them. This is actually in Manhattan, Kansas, so kind of in another university influenced community. Cottage court, again, this is probably something you're not seeing quite as frequently here in the Midwest, but we're starting to see it more and more. And I really think this is an interesting product type in the sense that, one, it usually, any of these can be owner occupied. These traditionally, the cottage court, obviously, these are single family detached homes here on smaller lots. It's really interesting. The story I love to share a lot of times, and some of you, when we were working on the housing study, maybe even heard me share this story, but this is a great example of a gentleman I had in a listening session a few years back who made the comment of, why do I want to move? I don't need another garage and granite countertops. I'm not looking for something necessarily bigger. He's like, I would take a high quality unit on a smaller lot with a park across the street. So he was looking for something that was lower maintenance, but still kind of met his lifestyle. And that's really the idea behind the cottage court, is you're getting a high quality home in a little bit smaller, lower maintenance sort of setting. So again, having a little bit more of that density that you're allowing in those areas. I also think this is a neat product type for retirees, that they can then also have kind of a sense of community in a lower maintenance environment. Live work options, where you have some opportunities for businesses on the lower level with residential above. And I've seen these in a mixture of where the individuals are actually, that's their business on the lower level, but sometimes they can be disconnected too. I thought I'd use this example. So here in this aerial, you can see just about every product type that we were just talking about. So I hopefully everybody can see my arrow here. Here we have the townhomes. These are, entrance, off-street entrance townhomes. We've got, I think I counted up, this is about a 6-plex with units, again, individual entrances off of the sidewalk, another series of townhomes, the cottage court here, another little cottage court over here, a single family sort of construction townhomes, additional townhomes. These are single family homes along here. So kind of mixing all of that into one area with pretty high density that they're achieving. So these are some of those units within that development, the cottage court, the townhomes, that sixplex that I pointed out on the corner there is that bottom right one, excuse me. So why do we need this housing product type? Why is it kind of becoming all the buzz, and why are we talking about it so much? One of the key pieces is affordability. Missing middle housing can be affordable by design. So often they're pretty simple construction. So they have, which allows for a little bit lower construction costs, and Jerry will be able to probably talk to this better than I ever could, but they're stick built traditionally, so they allow for a little bit lower construction costs. They also, a lot of the advocates point out, they will point out reduced car dependency. Now I'll put a little bit of a caveat on that in our more rural areas. I know much of your area, Bloomington, is a lot like Omaha. I sit on our transit authority board, but I'm not going to tout that every part of Omaha you could live in locations where you could live without a car. Now, Jerry can talk about one of his project areas where he's done some infill work, where there is that opportunity that you could probably as a household maybe have one car, but well, I'm going to be pretty honest and say that in most places in the Midwest, going completely without a car is probably still pretty hard to do. But they are absolutely more walkable. Do you have to use your car to do everything, to do every errand, to go out and exercise, to do all of those things? No, it should reduce your car dependency in that sense and give you a greater sense of community. As you saw in that aerial, we are also getting very efficient land use. So we're creating density at a scale that feels like a real neighborhood, at a scale that feels like almost like a single family neighborhood, but you're getting a lot more efficiency of the land. And that was a really key issue, I think, for a lot of the communities in the Uplands region, was how do we build something that's more affordable and being as efficient as possible with the water, the streets, the sewer, all of that infrastructure, especially if we're talking about new development, is essential. We have to get as much kind of bang for the buck as we can, especially in the greenfield development areas. So efficiency of land use is really important in providing some of that affordability. It also, I think, is an interesting phenomenon of the opportunity for income properties too. So one of the pieces that I didn't touch on was the accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, which are growing in popularity right now too. And also those, we kind of talked about some of the duplexes. So those are all income generating opportunities. So historically in a lot of our cities, like say a Chicago, families would have bought maybe that duplex, or like the stacked duplex especially. They would have lived in one unit and they would have rented out the other unit. That allowed them to build income, build equity, and maybe stay there, or then use that to move to their next level of housing. So that, I think, is one of the exciting things in that comes up a lot too in the conversations around accessory dwelling units, is they really do provide an income opportunity for some households. Why is this important especially in the Indiana Uplands region? The previous slide, I guess I didn't point out, I'll maybe go back, if it's too small on your screen. The map there, it comes from the study, and it's showing the percentage of households that are paying more than 30% of their income on rent. So finding ways that we can bring housing, especially rental housing, to the market in a more affordable manner is really important. Okay, the other piece of this is the great opportunity, I think, that we have when we start to look at our demographics within the region. When this again was pulled from the study, the data was pulled. You won't find this table specifically because I kind of manipulated and to put it into this table to show it. I didn't just show it graphically in this way, I guess is what I should say. 25% of the population across the whole 11 county region is under the age of 25, I think. And then another 23% is between the ages of 20 and 34. So that 23% of households are within that range that they're entering the housing market probably for the first time as renters, and frequently are in that age category of being first-time home buyers. So they're either moving in the next 10 years, they're either going to be moving into that or they're there now as first-time home buyers. These product types provide a really affordable source as first-time home buyers. So I think that's an important thing to remember, is that when we're adding these product types to maybe to existing neighborhoods, it doesn't mean they have to be rental. We can add a product like we've been seeing these, the duplexes or the fourplexes. These can be owner-occupied product types. I think it's really easy to assume they're going to be renters, and we're going to talk about that here in a little bit, but this is the full range, and these individuals are moving into their first-time home buying experiences, and this can be a kind of a first step into the market to build equity, to potentially move to, then we need an extra bedroom because our family is expanding. So it's a good entry-level product point, or it's a good entry, or it's a good product point for those households that are still looking to rent. But, you know, I mean, Bloomington's a great example, but they want to be in something that's not with all the students. They've gone past that point in their life. We have another 26% of the population that's between the ages of 45 and 64. So these individuals are empty nesters or entering their years as empty nesters and young retirees, and often are looking for products that are lower maintenance, allow for more casual lifestyle for them. So that's another great opportunity that we have in the market to provide housing products that are different from the single family detached on a big lot where I have to maintain the yard, and that's just not where they're potentially at within their life. So we have a lot of opportunity in the market today within the Indiana region, Uplands region. Okay, so why isn't this product type being built in much of the region? So I want to start a little bit talking about some of our smaller markets that we have within the region. As we discovered in the study, over the last few years, there's been very little construction activity, which means that we've had pretty untested markets. This often leaves both the contractor, builder, developer, and the financing community a little leery about jumping in, especially if it's a product type that hasn't been done. So traditionally, over the last probably 20 or 30 years, in many of our communities, what has been being built has been single family detached homes, or in a few duplexes, or maybe some multifamily. In a lot of places, the multifamily has maybe even been subsidized housing, and that's really the only multifamily that we've been seeing, and it's been maybe a little bit bigger scale multifamily. So some of these product types are seen as a little more untested, and therefore make individuals a little bit more nervous. We also, in some of our rural communities, we talked about this in a number of the counties in the region, we have some depressed valuations. So can we build something and get it appraised at what it's going to cost us? Or could we go in and rehab these types of units and be able to get our money back out of them for what it cost us to rehab them? Also, this means sometimes that we have much smaller profit margins. So I'm going to keep doing what I know I can get the best profit margins off of, and I'm a little more leery about this sort of product type. On a regional scale, we're also looking at some zoning regulation issues too. So I think one of the key things here to look at is, do we have these products already in our community, and are they a non-conforming? They should never be a non-conforming use within our neighborhoods. If they are done at the right scale, they should always be a conforming use within any neighborhood. So I think that's step one, is, are we making these existing units already challenging by making them non-conforming? And then where do we have the opportunity? Again, this is not about density, this is about scale. So if we're limiting to 2 to 2.5 stories, we address the parking issue. The density really isn't necessarily as much of an issue. So often this helps us address some of the not in my backyard sorts of issues. We're also seeing a growing interest And actually later this afternoon, I will be speaking at the Upper Midwest American Planning Association conference on corridor redevelopment. My piece of it in that presentation is about bringing housing to some of our corridors. So many of our communities have older commercial corridors, and this is true even for our medium and smaller sized cities too. We have these older commercial corridors that are struggling. They've maybe seen some businesses leaving over the years, and it's a real opportunity to add housing options that maybe would get a little bit of pushback in some other neighborhoods. The key to this is walkability. If we're going to add housing options and product types in some of those areas, we have to add walkability. We can't just, take the Walmart out and plop down housing in the middle of a sea of concrete. So they still need to be well thought out and well designed. And that's really true with regards to any zoning regulations. If we're sticking with quality designs and making sure the site plans are well done, we're addressing many of the issues that neighbors maybe have a concern with. We're also finding, and this is absolutely true in the Indiana Uplands region, that demand is greater than builder capacity. So we have a group of builders in the region. They're doing a great job. They're meeting an absolute need. We probably still need them doing what they're doing, but we need to expand on that. And we need to stop maybe asking them to build things that they don't know or are uncomfortable with, and begin to talk about how do we build the next generation of builders and developers that are willing to take the risk. I think that's an important piece that we have to remember, is that we're talking about growing the next generation of risk takers, and that those risk takers are willing to work in our communities and build the products that we need that are going to meet our long-term demands. So I think that kind of gives us a high-level overview of what we see as the product type, what we're seeing as why it's important kind of to this region, but also why we haven't been seeing those products being built. So Lisa, I'll throw it back to you.
Okay, thank you, Amy. I really appreciate that. And actually, I'm going to ask Jerry if he would like to share his screen and get started. And we already have some questions, but we'll ask them of you at the end, okay? So Jerry, if you can start your video and share your screen, that would be great.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay, just a second here.
There we go.
Okay, how's that?
Perfect.
And you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Let's see here. Okay, so first I'm going to just give a little bit of background on myself. It's as I sit and listen to things about next generation developers and families making small investments and then those investments growing, it really rings a bell with me. My father was a drywaller and did not have a retirement. And when I was 8 years old, my parents inherited $500. And they were either going to buy a new dining room set or invest it. And according to my mother, a fast-talking real estate agent got a hold of them. And there was a fourplex, and convinced them to use their $500 to buy a fourplex. In my world, these were just small apartment buildings. The term missing middle really, hadn't been coined. And to me, a missing middle is the product type that was built in the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s. As I've studied apartments, I really think in the 70s with the advent of interstates, there was also, I think, some legislation, related to fair housing and different things that had changed over the time. And you really see in the 70s, the concept of an apartment complex, in the suburbs, really being developed. So I grew up with missing middle. I didn't know there was such an industry as property management. I just thought that's what owners do. We painted the units, we cleaned the units, we leased the units, we moved people in, we moved people out. And over time, my parents bought a fourplex and another fourplex and another fourplex. And I always thought that was a better deal than drywalling, and asked why they didn't do more apartments. And they said, well, it takes a lot of capital. We don't have that kind of money. And then I took a very roundabout way to getting my capital to get started in the apartment business. Somewhere along the lines, I realized that if I could study abroad and work abroad, that it's not uncommon for companies to pay for your housing and give you a stipend and so forth. And so I ultimately was able to work in Japan. I like to say I was a migrant worker, but instead of chasing the dollar, I chased the yen, and I sent money back to Omaha. And I started buying existing fourplexes, duplexes. Again, it would have been a missing middle product. It was what I could afford. I certainly couldn't afford to go buy a 200 or 300 unit complex. And we self-managed them, on nights and weekends, and continued to do our day jobs in corporate America. And I had aspirations over time to do the real estate full time. And in 2008, I ended up diving in. We started a company called Urban Village, and Urban Village actually went into a 6-block radius in Omaha. It was an urban infill area. It would have been a mix of single family homes with the missing middle product that would have been built in the 30s and 40s. Arguably a walkable neighborhood, although there was minimal economic prosperity. There was nothing in the neighborhood that I would have personally lived in. My mother taught me that we had a policy that we wouldn't own anything that we wouldn't live in ourselves. And so we started rehabbing old missing middle product and bringing it up to a quality that I would personally choose to live in it. And in doing so, we found that there was a lot of good jobs in this particular area, but the housing actually didn't match the quality of the incomes of the people that were working in those jobs. And so they chose not to live in those neighborhoods and would jump in their car and drive other places. So as we started to improve the product, people came, and we found that there was a market. So we ultimately, within that 6-block radius, we redeveloped somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 missing middle infill units that were existing that would have been, again, built anywhere from the 20s to the 60s. We went in and did complete gut rehab. And one of the things that we also had learned, and I'd learned from my mother, she had a 10-minute rule. We couldn't have anything that was farther than 10 minutes from our house. And that was because managing missing middle is a little bit trickier. It's harder to have the scale, to have enough units together if you bought one fourplex here and another fourplex, 6 miles away. So as I watched larger successful apartment people with large complexes, it's not uncommon these days for an apartment complex to be 200 to 400 units. So we made an effort to keep ourselves contained within a 6-block area, and ultimately we're able to buy enough buildings and rehab that it brought us a level of efficiency. Our maintenance men could jump in a van and, within 3 minutes be to any of our properties, which would not be unlike a suburban complex where you could jump in the golf cart and drive to the back 15 acres. So anyway, we've developed, existing missing middle infill. I have also then built a new apartment complex in an urban setting, which would have been 4-story wood frame on podium garage, very dense. I've also built an apartment complex in the suburbs, but my true passion was really around the complexity of rehabbing the urban core and the missing middle in the urban. And so I thought, why don't we build new missing middle neighborhoods? And so I set out to do that. And ultimately, that's what became the bungalows on the lake. But one of my early inspirations for this was a realization. These 2 dots are infill buildings that we have in an urban core that we had rehabbed. And they're called dumbbell buildings. If you notice, they're kind of squeezed in the middle. And I did not realize, but one of the first building codes ever for apartments was in the 1870s. New York had a tuberculosis outbreak. And basically they would build buildings pin to pin and block each other's windows. And so they didn't have a lot of fresh air. So they did a national design and said, hey, we need to come up with a better way to build apartments. We need to have windows that don't get blocked. And they came up with this dumbbell. And it was funny, I guess the developers all hooted and hollered and screamed, we'll never be able to build affordable housing again. This won't work. And so kind of struck me as how much history repeats itself. Also, the thing that I learned from my Honda research and development days working with engineers was how people will solve to certain constraints. And I realized that I had thought we really started copying and pasting blueprints with the advent of computers. But what I realized was here are the dumbbell buildings that arguably would have been built in the prairie of Nebraska that had already been designed to solve problems in New York. And those problems arguably didn't exist in Omaha, but yet we solved it and limited our solutions as if those constraints did exist. So it occurred to me that we must still be doing that in the apartment industry. And so I set out to challenge myself to develop a new style of apartments, which would be a master planned missing middle community, which is outlined here. I don't know, friend introduced me to Dan with Opticos. He was our master planner and consultant on this. And ultimately, as we were developing it, I was challenging myself. Our mission is that we are partners in peace and prosperity, and that we live with gratitude. And the we are our investors, our residents, and our employees of the property management company. And so I wanted to set out and build something. So this is on the left-hand side is a suburban apartment complex that I built on a small lake in West Omaha. It's a 200-unit complex. It's arguably kind of dense. It's kind of very traditional. The architect is Humphreys. They're out of Dallas. They're known for being a good architect for apartments, and arguably these units may be built all over the country. Again, just cutting and pasting. So trying to adhere to our mission, I wanted to build something that would be positive and in worst case situation, neutral to all three parties, being our investors, the residents, and my employees. So anything we did with the bungalows on the lake, which was going to be a missing middle, had to be a plus for someone, a plus for the resident, a plus for the property management company, or a plus for the investor, and it couldn't be a negative. And so I benchmarked myself to this 200-unit complex that we had already built. And as we started to go into design differences, I kept going back and comparing and contrasting. Could I, build it for the same price? Could I build the units a good size? Could we manage it effectively? Would it fit into the neighborhood better? Would it, be a better living experience for the residents? And ultimately, I probably had 200 or 300 items of criteria. And I think the missing middle is a more agile product, even when built in a neighborhood scale level. And we have been able to demonstrate that I think it is a superior product and a superior design, even if it's built out new in the greenfield. It certainly can be used for infill and different things like that. I do think from a developer perspective, the challenge there is how does someone get the scale? How do you, get it beyond a hobby? Own a fourplex, own an eightplex. It's a great investment. It's a great hobby. It takes a lot of passion. I think in today's world with the zoning and neighbors, it's nearly impossible for a small developer like my parents or like myself to start over. I find that, we've gotten bigger. We're still considered very small in the apartment industry. Our portfolio right now is 1,100, and I'll go to apartment complex or conferences, and if you don't own 10 or 20,000 units, they kind of turn up their nose and stub at you, and you're a nobody. So, the apartment industry has really consolidated, and there's very few players nationally. And I actually think it's partly due to the zoning and the regulations. It's very difficult to repeat anything. I think most projects are really looked at as, hey, every design's one-off. Let's make sure it's well done. I'm actually currently out in Los Angeles right now, and I'm studying missing middle neighborhoods every day. And I'm walking around, and there are literally thousands and thousands of fourplexes and duplexes and carriage courts. And these were all built in the 40s and 50s, and they're cute. Some of them are a little bit depreciated and need some reinvestment, but the neighborhood that they create is amazing. And I sit there and I look and I'm like, every one of these would have been a different owner, a different developer, a different, mom and pop, person back in the 30s and 40s. And I'm not sure, but whatever's happened in our system, it really doesn't allow or accommodate that level of, bootstrapping and entrepreneurialism anymore, in my opinion. So anyway, this starts to show a design difference of the two. So on the left-hand side is the built-out traditional apartment complex that I did. And on the right side is Prairie Queen. If you look to the top of the picture and to the right, our property actually goes all the way to the lake up on the right and following that street on the left of the picture here. So it's actually a 50-acre site. It's master planned for 650 to 725 units, depending on a few decisions that we'll kind of make as we get market feedback. And this particular part where the buildings are coming up is really the first 5 acres. One of the things that we have found that are advantages of missing middle, and this is part of our first 132 units that are finished. On the lower right-hand corner is a fourplex. Next to it on the left is a fourplex. Next to it is a fiveplex. One of the things is that we designed our parking lots to look like streets. So if you kind of look on my picture here to the left, we have a sea of parking. It's ugly. Tenants are walking from their cars to a building, into a big hallway, down a hallway. There's just no human scale to it. And it's just, I built it. We did a great job. We used high quality materials. We, kept all the neighbors and the city officials happy. But at the end of the day, it doesn't meet my standard of what I really like to create, which is a community and a neighborhood. Ultimately, in some of these things, I was very intentional on. To make the missing middle work, we were intentional not to have any private, public hallways. So all of the apartments goes directly to the unit. And I'm going to flip back here. On the left here, that 1010, I have over 1 acre of hallways in those buildings that we have to clean, maintain. Some dude comes home in the middle of the night and vomits, and then you go to work early in the morning, and my cleaning people don't get there till 7, and so you've got to walk by it. It's just not always, a peaceful way to live. And it's, when you think about green and efficiency, we're wasting all this space and all this energy to, condition those spaces and so forth. So there's areas where the missing middle costs more, but then there's areas where the missing middle will cost less. And so I think you kind of got to know the differences and work the two. And one of the ways to make missing middle work is to have the private entrances, no common hallways. We end up with many more windows, so you get much more light, feels more like a home. We actually had energy testing done on our apartments here, and there was a few things that I had done intentionally as a long-term owner that I wanted to make sure my fire sprinkler lines didn't freeze, and a few things that can be problematic in apartments in the Midwest. And ultimately, we tested as the top 1% of efficient apartments in Omaha. And it also has to do, there's some interesting things, the way the energy code reads, that the missing middle, you actually get more credit. So that was an interesting finding that I hadn't set out for. This is just the first part of our site when we came in and we're doing the mass grading out at the bungalows on the lake. Here it is under development. The lower picture, the first few units were finished, and then ultimately these are all done now, which I'll share with you. This is 5.6 acre site. Again, we've designed the streets to look like designed our parking lots to look like streets. The buildings here on the lower are live work buildings. We have duplexes, we have threeplexes, fourplexes, fiveplexes, and then the largest would be an eightplex. These would be the live work buildings. So on the main floor, they technically would be zoned to be able to do small businesses. I finished them out as one unit apartment buildings because we're out in the middle of a cornfield and I didn't really think there would be economic viability yet. And then on the second and third floor is a townhome. To my surprise, I have actually gotten a few small businesses and they have moved in. Their overhead is low because their space is small. And anyway, they've actually thrived, which I will not say we had predicted that or take any credit for that. They're just young entrepreneurs really hustling. This would be an example of walking through our parking lot. So when you're on that sidewalk right there, you are walking through an apartment complex's parking lot. And, you know, people like, no, this is a neighborhood. And again, we take a lot of pride that we intentionally designed the parking lots to look like streets. Some people say, well, this is street parking. We ultimately were, you know, we negotiated this with our city agreements and how things would be counted. We bought all the land, we paid for all the streets. You know, my position was, you know, as an apartment guy, I'm buying all the parking lots and the streets running through my parking lots. So anyway, the math ought to work, and it did. This right-hand corner is a 6-plex. The upper right is a 5-plex. These two on the left are duplexes. Again, these are some additional street views. We are going to end up having like 2,000 trees lining the streets. We did a 10 feet of grass from the curb to the sidewalk. If you'll notice, I put uplighting in all my trees. In Omaha, you would be in a probably $800 million plus neighborhood before you would, you know, see uplighting and people's landscaping. So we're really treating these, you know, as if we own them. One of the other things that's been quite interesting is the level of economic diversity that we've achieved. We have units here that you are looking at in this picture, and one of them rents for $995 a month, and one of them rents for $3,000 a month. And I would propose that I actually have almost at $100 price point, everything in between as you look at this picture. So who's the poor guy on the street? Because if you make $3,000, if you're paying $3,000 for rent and another guy's paying $1,000, arguably your income is 3 times the person making $1,000. And I would propose as planners today that we segregate our neighborhoods based on economics. If I built a $900,000, if you had a $900,000 house and I came and built a $300,000 house next to you, I would be thrown out of the neighborhood in Omaha. The zoning wouldn't allow it, the city officials wouldn't allow it, the covenants wouldn't allow it. So I will propose that we have actually, while our codes and things no longer racially segregate, I would propose we certainly economically segregate. So one of the things we've been able to accomplish here is economic integration. So again, there is someone in this picture that's paying $1,000 and someone else who's paying $3,000, and they just all walk their dogs and they have social bridges and they interact and they have community. And I will propose that doesn't exist at my other apartment complexes where the range of our rents might be a much more narrow band. And so we'd end up with a more homogeneous demographic. Here's just some more day views. You can kind of see one of the interesting things about designing the streets to be the parking, or the parking lots to function as streets, is your car is super close to your private entrance. You can see your car right outside your window. There's lots of windows in these units. And again, in a traditional suburban apartment complex these days, you know, you park your car, you walk away from it, you go into this dungeon of a hallway, your building has windows, or your unit maybe has windows on one side, and you never see your car again. And, you know, so, you know, they talk about safety in neighborhoods and how eyes outside, you know, eyes in the windows create safety. And so I'll propose missing middle actually creates more safety as well. Here would be some examples. We do oversized decks and porches. I'm making an effort to provide like these red and black Adirondack chairs. We are looking for, you know, a level of consistency. Alleys are a key. You can see here, we get a lot of our parking. There's not a single parking lot on this project. We get our parking via garages. Our residents and in Nebraska, you know, tend to want garages. One of the downsides of missing middle and the alley system is how do I get a garage that goes directly into the unit? And that's often something that happens today in nice large apartment complexes. So one of the things we did to mitigate it is we actually put radiant floor heating in all of our garages. And then we added extra back doors in the units. Like you can see here on the right picture, these are actually back doors that will get you much closer to your garage. We also put back doors on the garages, trying to really be conscientious about the travel distance from the minute you walked out of your apartment, that I could get you into your garage in maybe 10 to 20 seconds. And in doing so, you know, you leave your warm apartment, 10 seconds, boom, you're in a warm garage. Your car's actually warm, so now you're driving to work and not waiting 10 minutes for it to warm up. This would be an example of an interior. Again, lots of windows because, you know, as Amy was mentioning, we're building house scale. And house scale has 4 sides and 3 sides, and you get windows on every side. And so those are the type of things then that I actually think, you know, help us partner with our residents. We get a longer term neighbor. We also, let's see here, in these pictures, if you look, I popped the tops. So our buildings are often 2.5 stories because in these old mansion neighborhoods, an attic used to be used as a bedroom. We designed these attics to have bedrooms, and then they're over the living room of the tenant that lives in that unit. And what that means is you're not stacking bedrooms on top of each other with unrelated tenants, which typical apartments do. And you often in these wood buildings get noise transfer up and down. And so, you know, sometimes our poor property management people, you know, get uncomfortable questions about, you know, the people upstairs are being too noisy, or did you rent to a rabbit, or, you know, whatnot. And so by not stacking the bedrooms, we've made for a much more peaceful existence for the residents as well as our property management team. There's some, you can see here, there's a staircase on this left picture going up to the attic, you know, master bedroom. You can see the private entrances. We also, this upper right left panel, we put, we hardwired fiber optics to every single door, and we put commercial strikers on every single door, and then we routed it back to a server room. And so our residents and the UPS and Amazon people can go and push a button, your phone will ring, the video and sound will kick on, and if you choose, you can push the button, which will release the lock on your door. The UPS guy or Amazon guy can stick the package inside your door, pull the door shut, and automatically locks. So that's something that we're trying to do to accommodate, you know, kind of the new generation. Also, we didn't realize this, but with the private entrances, I was doing it because I didn't want to have to manage the hallways and all those type of things. But in fact, during the COVID, it's been quite advantageous because we don't have doorknobs that are being shared and hallways and so forth that are being shared. Here's an example of just some more finishes. We try to do a lot of lighting. Again, if you look up on the right-hand picture here, I put Japanese bidets in all of my units. It's one of our core values is that we won't put anything in an apartment we won't put in our own house. I have them in my own house. Everyone in Japan has them. And so this was kind of cute, but during the pandemic, we could advertise that we never run out of toilet paper. This is just a couple more shots. That's a 5-plex right there. Here's a few more views. So anyway, I talk all day about missing middle and apartments, but I would prefer to direct any of my comments to questions or ideas or things you might want to talk about. So I'll turn it back to the host at this point.
Okay, there we go. Okay, Jerry, you want to turn on your video so we can see you and Amy? Amy, you too. Great. All right, we do have some questions. Thank you. Where to start? I'm gonna start with one that I actually have a question too that piggybacks off of a question we got. So doesn't less dependency on cars mean that there must be other means of transit or that a larger employer is nearby? And then I'd like you to, and Amy, you might want to take that, but then part B for Jerry, you know, in your Prairie Queen development, you allow 2 cars, or you allow for 2 cars per unit. And I'm curious how you make that work, because I looked at the house per cars per household in Omaha. It's very similar to what we have here in Southern Indiana of 2 cars per household, which means some households have more. So Amy, you want to start with transportation nearby? And then Jerry, you want to talk about parking?
Sure. Yeah. So as I noted, it's often referred to as one of the ways that missing middle can be more affordable is that there's less car dependency. You're exactly right. We live in a region of the country where the average household probably has at least 2 cars. So if we're going to reduce that dependency, you're exactly right. We need to either be close to transit and reliable, frequent transit. And we also probably, or we need to be close to job centers. So it's actually kind of interesting because we're finishing up a study with the city of Lincoln. And that's something that we've really focused on is one of the ways if they want to they're being challenged under some new state legislation to identify where this housing product is appropriate and to be prioritizing that within the community. And so one of the things that we said is we're not going to necessarily pick a spot on the map and say this is where it should be, but establish some criteria. So part of that criteria is that it should be close to transit or close to major job centers or service areas, thus being allowing somebody, so example, Jerry will know, and if anybody has been to Omaha for the College World Series, our office is located in the Old Market, historic district within Omaha. And 20 years ago, I lived in an apartment down here, and I could easily walk to my job. Our household could have survived on 1 car. And because we were both living and working within this district, within this neighborhood. So that's essential to being able to reduce that car dependency. So, and I think that's where Jerry's project is a good example of how we have to live in the reality of we're in the Midwest and most households have 2 cars. And or at least households greater than 1 person, and even one person households have 2 cars, right? So we have to live in that reality and figure out how we're going to accommodate that. And that's even the case for infill, which might be a little question later, and we'll come back to that. So
hey, Jerry, you want to talk about parking?
Yeah, so I'm probably actually pretty hardcore on parking. I was born and raised in the suburbs. I've had some urban experience, but at the end of the day, if I'm going to partner with my tenants in peace, that means they need adequate and good parking, convenient parking, and probably lots of parking. So there's times when, different types of folks want less parking or walkability, and I'm on board for walkability, but I have a personal requirement that we have parking. And so we are often, meeting or exceeding the city code. I'm really not looking at the code. I'm looking at what the market demands. And in the Midwest, the market demands, for me, it demands parking. And even more importantly than that, it probably demands garage parking. When we're renting a unit from $1,000 to $3,000, the difference of $100, $150 garage in their financial decision is not that impactful. They may be driving a car that's worth, $30,000, $50,000, and they want that car parked inside. They want their personal comfort, as in being warm. And so in the case of Prairie Queen or the bungalows on the lake here, we actually are parking 1 garage per unit, not just, 2 parking stalls, but we are getting 1 garage per unit. My 1010 apartment complex that I had shown you there, we're probably only at about 0.6 garages per unit. So most apartment complexes would not have 1 garage per unit. We are also, like if you have 2 for a 2-bedroom, 2 parking stalls, 1.5 for a 1-bedroom, you would average, and you had 50-50 mix of units, you'd have 1.75 parking stalls. We've actually achieved like 2.13 parking stalls at the bungalows on the lake. And so I believe it is a misnomer that missing middle will not have enough parking. Missing middle, you can have wonderful design. I think you can also meet the needs of, someone's got a density checkbox that they're trying to check, or an investor. Again, I think we've really analyzed it and feel that we've come up with a balanced solution that really meets the various stakeholders' needs and objectives.
Okay.
We make our streets a little wider so that they accommodate the parking, but that would be one.
I noticed that. That's great. I have one more question. We're running out of time, and I want to get to this one. And I'm going to kind of push a couple of questions together for the answer to this one. So we have a question. Last year in Bloomington, we had a we'll call it a discussion over increased density in our core neighborhoods, and the neighborhoods did not want it. And I'll read this. The density was precisely the issue. These old neighborhoods laid out in pre-automobile days regard themselves as already dense and did not welcome the proposed new density, especially when there's plenty of room to build elsewhere. Are there places that missing middle housing could be built but shouldn't? So that's part one. And then the second point is that there's a second question about, or a second thing about using empty retail spaces. And I think that's something we might want to think about as commercial space changes given our, we'll call them new circumstances. So either one of you can address that one. Who wants to go first?
Well, I'll maybe jump in if that's okay, and then I'll throw it to Jerry because he's actually done some of that redevelopment work in some of those neighborhoods. You know, I think it comes down to what's the question. Is the question about density, or is the question about are we dealing with the things we need to deal with, which was with regards to parking and site design and those key pieces. So I was actually just having this conversation with another planner in a large city about the preservation of single family neighborhoods. And I posed the question of, does it really matter to us if it looks like a single family home, it deals with the parking in an appropriate way? Does it matter how many units are in that structure? If we've dealt with that, and you know, it could be owner occupied. I think it's really easy for people to go to the assumption too that, you know, I'm going to have a bunch of renters living next to me. That's not necessarily the case. So I think it's all comes down to, are we dealing with the site plan in the proper way? Are we dealing with the parking? And then does the home fit the character and the style of the rest of the neighborhood? So I think those are the questions that we need to be asking. And if we're dealing with that, then, you know, what's scaring us? I guess I'm just going to be blunt and say that. What's scaring us? Is it that now I have two households living next to me, potentially one that's owner occupied and they're renting out the other unit? If they're not filling up parking spaces on the street, then what's our next kind of, I guess, hurdle that we're concerned about? What's the core issue at why we are concerned about that unit being next door to us, or two units being next door to us? On the infill piece, I saw a couple of the comments, and I just want to emphasize, I guess maybe I didn't clarify that on the commercial corridors. It's absolutely the place to do it. And that's what we're championing, is that to add that sort of residential piece to it. The point that I was trying to make, and I could even throw up here, if we've got a second, I'll show an image of an example of this, is we can't just plop it down in the sea of concrete. That doesn't make for a walkable neighborhood. We have to think about how that, again, how is the site designed? How are we creating a sense of place? Am I comfortable walking to my car? Am I comfortable walking to those businesses that are in that corridor in a safe and comfortable manner? So absolutely, it's a really great opportunity to add that infill, but we've got to make it a comfortable environment. So sorry, I'll let Jerry jump in and see if he has something.
And Jerry, in the interest of time, we have 5 minutes left in our session.
Okay. Yeah. Boy, to be honest, I find myself at times getting tired. You know, I want to go build affordable housing. I want to, you know, create housing, and I spend more time negotiating and debating the social issues than I do the construction and the leasing issues. So part of why I went out to the suburbs of you know, out in the sticks of Nebraska is, if I get there first and I buy 50 acres, there's no neighbors who complain. And so, you know, I just in some ways did that. You know, as I think about something, there's a book, and it's called The Color of Law. It's not something I would have considered myself typically reading, but I read it, and it was an interesting point. And as I've experienced Prairie Queen or the bungalows on the lake, we in essence copied an older neighborhood called Dundee in Omaha. And that neighborhood was built with duplexes, single family homes, streetcar apartments. It's a lovely neighborhood. And if you look at the old covenants, you could discriminate against African Americans and you could exclude them. And so you could build an integrated neighborhood, economically integrated, and yet you could protect yourself from the integration of race. There were Supreme Court rulings that were struck down, and cities, you know, couldn't red line. You couldn't put, you know, here's an African American neighborhood and build industrial all around it. You couldn't zone it like that anymore. Only after the Supreme Court struck those down did our city officials start to make a distinction in multifamily zoning. It was only residential zoning historically. And so you could build a duplex, you could build a threeplex, a single family home, you could build a carriage house. It was only a reaction to when the Supreme Court says you can't discriminate against race, did other jurisdictions start to create other entry barriers. And my understanding is the intent to isolate apartments, isolate the missing middle was a way then to keep the neighborhoods racially segregated. And I think honestly now we've created economic segregation, and that's bringing a whole other set of social problems. And so, you know, I can't beat the system. I got to figure out how to work within it, within my age, because I'll die before all this stuff gets figured out. And so I'm going out into the suburbs and I'm taking multifamily zoning, big, ugly zoning chunks that are allowed, and I can go build big 3-story dense apartment complexes. And I'm choosing to use that zoning and put a better design on it. And that's what the bungalows on the lake is. And that's how I don't have to fight the system. And I can end up with a lot of economic diversity, and I don't care what the color of your race or your religion is, and we can all live together and go walk our dogs. And that's how I'm choosing to solve it.
Okay. We have a couple of other questions, but unfortunately we have 2 minutes left. So I'm going to ask one, and you got 2 minutes, or less than 2 minutes, because I have some announcements to do at the end. And then if you asked a question that we did not get to, I will send them to Jerry and Amy, and I will make them available on the housing webinar section of our website. So don't worry, we'll get your questions answered. We have a question here that says, what systemic changes need to happen in order for small scale developers to thrive? And what's your view of the incremental development approach?
Listen, for a small developer to thrive, they have to know what the rules are. The rules have to be set before they ever start. If they have to pay for attorneys, they have to pay for civil engineers, they have to pay for city planners, you cannot spread that cost across 4 units. This is why I have to go do 650 units. It's the only way I can design properly. I look out here at LA and I just like, there must have been set rules. You did not have 3,000 different families build 3,000 different fourplexes or duplexes, and every one of them had to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on attorneys to, you know, deal with the system. And so you just need some good rules and play by the rules, and let us go build to the rules. But right now the rules are, well, let us see what you're going to do, and then, you know, we'll all armchair quarterback it. Everything's a one-off. It's really, really expensive.
Yeah.
The good news for me is, as I get bigger, it keeps my young competition from nipping at my heels. So facetiously, it actually starts to work for the people that are in the system.
Well, there you go. Okay, unfortunately, we are out of time. So like I said, I will send the rest of our questions to Jerry and Amy, and I will get answers. We will make sure those get posted for you. I want to thank you, both Amy and Jerry, for coming and talking to us today about missing middle housing and the importance of design. We have 2 more housing sessions. So if you're interested in continuing the discussion about housing, please get on our website and register for those classes. We're going to take a 10-minute break. I believe it's a 10-minute break. And then we are going to reconvene for our award ceremony. We're going to be honoring some very interesting people and businesses and groups today. So we hope that you will all join us. Your link to that meeting was in your original email that gave you the link to this particular session. So hopefully we'll see you all at the awards ceremony at noon. And thank you again for joining us. And thank you again, Amy and Jerry. I really found the conversation to be very interesting. So we'll see you soon. Enjoy your break.